Hello, everyone. I'm Hajar Dalwal, and I'm part of the Windows commercial team at Microsoft. Welcome to Tackling Tech. Let's face it, we are now living in an era where technology is part of our everyday lives. With the fast pace of technology innovations and dependency on technology, security is highly important. So people, devices, data, and identity remain secure and protected at all times, especially to mitigate cyber attacks, to name a few. We are going to focus on Windows security, and with that said, Windows 11 is the most secure operating system to date. There's many aspects of Windows security, but we're going to cover one of the most asked and most anticipated security feature, and that is Windows Labs, also known as Windows Local Administrator Password Solution. I'm thrilled to have Jay Simmons, who has been working on this solution for several months and who is going to talk all about it. Welcome, Jay.
Hello, Harjeet. Hey, it's great to be here. My name is Jay Simmons. I'm a software engineer in the Windows Servicing and Delivery organization. My primary focus is on things like Active Directory as well as Windows Labs. So happy to be here. So thank you for the opportunity.
Awesome. It's good to have you here. So I was going to try to give a quick description of what Windows Labs is. I'll give you the honor of doing that.
Thank you. So Labs Local Administrator Password Solution is a feature that is essentially managing on a regular basis, rotating on a regular basis, the password for a Windows local account. So this is not a Active Directory account or an Azure Active Directory account. It's an account that is specifically local to a given device. So what the feature does is it regularly rotates that password and it stores the password in the directory, either Active Directory in the on-premise scenario or Azure Active Directory. Now, why is that useful? Well, first of all, you want to be sure that those local accounts have very different secure passwords. Local accounts are a very, very favorite target for security hackers for things like password spray attacks, lateral traversal, and it's really critical that those accounts be locked down and be made secure. Now, we could, as a customer and as a security IT admin, you could just choose to disable them completely.
Right.
But why are they useful? So, it's, you know, imagine help desk scenarios. A help desk admin wants to get into a user's device and help them out and figure out why their machine, some scenario is not working. It's also useful for device recovery. So that's kind of in a nutshell what the Labs feature is all about and what it's used for.
It's perfect. It's so useful. I know I've been involved with labs as a sysadmin for several years. In my previous role, working in higher ed, so I'm familiar with it. And but we got the latest and greatest with Windows Labs. So before we get any further, I do want to highlight. You had a blog post that went out on April 11th, and it was the announcements of Windows Labs, and it's probably it's like one of the high, it has high views on this blog post, almost hitting 300,000 views and stuff like that. Very popular. It basically shows the demand and what IT pros have been looking for uh, to solve, local admin password scenarios here.
Exactly. There's several factors that I think led to all of the customer excitement around this feature. First and foremost, many of our customers, as you already know, Harjeet, are trying to
Mhm.
move to a cloud-based only deployment or management of their assets, and so that would include making their devices only be joined to Azure Active Directory, which is great.
Right.
But the legacy version of the Labs feature did not support storing passwords in Azure AD. So for many, many, many customers, this limitation was viewed as not just a blocker, but a critical security blocker. And we got plenty of very, very, very blunt feedback on that. Um, so that in and of itself was a big part of the excitement around this feature. But we didn't just stop there with adding that. We did so many more other things that I think our customers were pleasantly surprised by the sheer breadth of the features, the integration into Windows. I could go on and on, but feel free to just stop me here and
No, this is great. Keep on going.
um, so, I mean, I feel like a lot of our customers will know this, but just to be clear, we took the old feature and I basically rewrote it from scratch. So there's very little left of the legacy Labs code in the new version, modulo things like the design, but we're now integrated into Windows. The legacy feature was something you had to install as an add-on.
And
Um,
MSI, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, and it worked, right? I have no complaints about the legacy feature. It worked very well for thousands and tens of thousands of customers on millions of devices, but it still had these limitations, and the MSI package just kind of made it, a little awkward. So it's now part of Windows. It will be serviced and supported as a first-class Windows feature from here on out. I already talked about the Azure AD limitation, so we definitely fill that in. So on an Azure
Right.
AD joined device, you can configure the feature to back its password for the managed account up to Azure Active Directory. But we didn't stop there. Um, we added things like Intune management capability. So, if you're going to have a cloud managed device, it's got to be manageable from Intune. There's a brand new configuration service provider in Windows to manage this feature. Uh, New security features such as the post authentication actions. Many customers have asked for a way to say, okay, I want to retrieve the password and I want to log into the device for a short period of time, but I really don't want to have to worry that someone will forget to rotate the password when they're done,
All right.
because
Yeah.
most tasks like help desk admin, we're talking a few hours at most, and so you by default we will now we will rotate, not immediately, we will rotate the password one day after it's been used to authenticate to the device. That delay is configurable in hours from 1 to 24.
Mhm.
But this is driven from the device. It doesn't require any interaction from the cloud. The device will track that the account was used, and it will rotate the password at the end of the expiry period. So essentially, we're compressing the amount of time that the password is out there in the wild and available. So that just a little bit of extra security.
Is this also used in scenarios where I've seen your AMAs and stuff like that? Is that there's some IT folks, especially on premises, when they're imaging a machine, like putting a brand new golden image of Windows 11 and stuff like that. And since Windows Labs is already in Windows 11 and it's on by default, it all comes down to policies, right? So when you join the device to your Active Directory, now whether you have applied the policies based on those OUs, you're gonna get that the Labs policies applied to it, and it could affect. So what I've seen IT pros do is that or especially for help desk scenarios, they move a device to a non-labs configured OU, right?
So I think there's two flavors or two scenarios that you're referring to. On the brand new imaging workflow, it's true. The moment you move the moment the policies get applied to the device, which could happen, for instance, during a new image workflow when you join the machine to a domain, that device will act on the new Windows Labs feature will act on the policies immediately.
Yeah.
And because we're going to now rotate and manage that local account password, if you happen to be also using that local account for instance auto log on during the remainder of the machine imaging workflow, that would be a problem because it will break your workflow. We had some customer feedback around that.
There you
Now, in general, the Microsoft recommendation is to use something like a clean staging OU. So you join a machine into a staging OU if you're using AD, or into a administrative group that doesn't get Intune policies applied. And then you finish the configuration of the device, and then and only then, once you're at the very last step, do you move the device into its final OU or administrative group, or administrative unit rather. so that it receives its final set of policies. And so that's a workaround that will avoid that little gotcha. And it's true. And I've documented this on our website.
Yeah.
Now, the second scenario you mentioned, I did not think up this scenario on my own. I learned this from customers, and I was ecstatic because it was like, it really showed, if you go listen to the customers, just how much they can help you, how innovative they can be with stuff you don't even anticipate. So this is related to the fact that by default, we generally recommend that the Laps account, the local Laps account, is ready to go. It's in an enabled state. The Windows Laps component on the device is regularly rotating that account's password, so it's secure. It's a very secure password, and not subject, really, practically speaking, to password spray attacks. But some customers have taken it even further, and they want to keep that account in a disabled state by default. And I think that's where you were referring. And so the way they do that is that in a steady state operation, when the device is just being used by its end user in a normal fashion, the local Laps account stays disabled. We're still rotating the password. That's a perfectly valid thing to do. You can change and set the password on a disabled account. And then if they do hit a help desk scenario situation, they move the device into an OU or an administrative unit whose policies all of a sudden are very similar to where the device started, but the new policies have the twist that the account gets enabled. And I know of some very, very large customers, at least two, and I think there's more out there, that are using this. They were using this technique with the Legacy Laps feature, and they're following the same pattern with the new Windows Laps when they're, like, for instance, when they're migrating to Azure AD.
Right. Yeah, that's great explanation. And I think this is important to flesh out because, these are some of the questions that come up from customers and IT pros and stuff. Another big one, I think, there's some questions around it, is about Legacy Laps and Windows Laps. What is what, and can they coexist, and how do I migrate to the new and latest and greatest?
Yep, we have several options, and they're documented on the Windows Labs documentation site. First and foremost, we definitely recommend that companies do migrate to using Windows Labs as soon as possible on the supported platforms. So that would be Windows 10 and beyond, and Windows for Server 2019 and beyond. We know some customers are going to be on older platforms, but ideally you should be planning to migrate to newer ones as soon as possible. So how do you migrate from the Legacy Labs feature over to the new Windows Labs feature? So if you have to prepare your directory. In Azure AD, that's a matter of enabling the feature at your tenant level and configuring the Intune policies to enable the new Windows Labs stuff. If you're still working with on-premise AD, you have to extend your schema and also similarly, set up the new policies. Now, here's the trick when it comes to migration. It is possible to have a device that has side-by-side both Windows Labs and Legacy Labs coexisting. But the only way that works is if the two policies are managing different local accounts.
That's the key right there.
Yes. And so I've tried to be as transparent about this as I can, and it's so conceptually simple, but it does trip people up. So I'm glad we're covering this, Harjeet. What I would say is, think that through. Decide if you want to do a simultaneous replacement and migration where you uninstall Legacy Labs and move to using Windows Labs, or do you want to do the side-by-side scenario for a little while? Different customers have different tolerance levels for how much change they want to introduce. I've seen some companies that are like, "Hey, this is working great. Let's just go the whole way right now
to the switch." Yeah,
exactly. And then other customers, I'm not criticizing. They're just more conservative, and they take it step by step throughout their fleet, and that's fine. But the end goal is that you should really be driving to get onto using Windows Labs as soon as possible. The security benefits, I mentioned the post-authentication actions, the auto password reset, but also the fact that your password stored in Azure AD is far more secure than it is in the on-premise directory. But if you are still using the on-premise directory, the new Windows Lab supports password encryption, which is just a huge, huge step up. I cannot make that point strongly enough. I've
Yeah.
dealt with a lot of security investigations personally into either security incidents or near security incidents that were related to the clear text passwords that were stored by
Oh,
the
yeah.
legacy feature in AD. So yes, you can make those really secure with AD ACLs, but the security blanket feeling you'll get knowing that those passwords are encrypted with Windows Labs is a huge game changer.
And we're also using better ciphers, right? Security ciphers protocols for Windows Labs.
It's the password is always encrypted in transit, whether it's from the device to Azure AD or the device to on-premise AD. And yes, it's definitely encrypted at rest in both directories. In Azure AD, there's actually an extra layer of protection in addition to the default data protections that Azure provides. In the
Yeah.
on-premise directory, we've based that encryption on DP API in the Active Directory mode, and
Yeah.
I believe under the covers it uses AES 256 encryption. The
Right.
keys are replicated around the domain controllers, and there's a authorization model that you can customize if you wanted to for things like, maybe your bank tellers, your help desk admin should have immediate access to the bank teller machines, but maybe not so quick access to the CEO's machine. So that's another aspect of Labs deployment in general that you want to think about.
And one additional benefit of Windows Labs when you're doing on-premises, Active Directory, from what I understand, is password history, right?
That is correct. This was often requested in the past, so why would you care about this? If you had to restore a machine's image from a backup from, say, 6 months ago, and you were unable to get into it with any sort of corporate account, you needed the Labs local account, but Legacy Labs only stored the latest and greatest password, so you're kind of out of luck there. With new Windows Labs, you're exactly correct, Harjeet. We
Mhm.
store up to 12 of the older passwords in Active Directory, and those are all retrievable by admins so that you can access and log into the images that are restored from backup like that.
Yeah, excellent, awesome. So some of the things I've been learning about Windows Labs, both for Active Directory and Azure AD, obviously, policies. Policies are important. There's group policies. There's, CSPs, as you mentioned. But if you're doing Azure AD, there's some additional policies that are not available in group policies, correct? They're not policies, but settings. Like,
Are you referring to the Intune initiated password reset?
yes.
Okay, gotcha. Sorry, I was geeking out there. I wasn't thinking of that as a policy, but we're on the same page. Um, so yes, this is some of the extra goodies that we have put into this feature. Some of the extra investment. If you are managing your devices with an Intune subscription, you have the ability with Windows Labs now that you can initiate a password reset on that device immediately on demand from the cloud. And if you're familiar with the older version of Labs and the way that Windows Labs today works on premise, how do you initiate? How do you tell a device, hey, for whatever reason, security breach, or I just feel like it? How do you tell the device to rotate its password? In Legacy Labs, that was done by modifying state the password expiry timestamp in the directory, and then the next time the device woke up and looked at that timestamp, it would say, "Oh, the admin wants me to reset the password." But that could be half an hour later. It might be even longer than that if the device doesn't have connectivity to Active Directory domain controllers to download or check the latest state. So with an Intune managed device, what you can do is you can use the capabilities of the Intune channel for managing that device to tell it to immediately rotate the password, which is really cool. So it's literally click on the button, you wait a couple minutes at most, and it's done. So a nice little capability, I think, really helps shows the integration. And also will be useful to customers when, say, responding to security breach incidents, like, for instance, stolen devices, things like that.
Yeah. Oh, this is awesome. This is great. The One of the things I've also been learning is, what's fascinating is the background policy processing cycles for both, right? Windows Server Active Directory and Azure AD. They kind of do about similar things, right? Like how they look for expired passwords and things like that, and generate new ones. But one interesting thing is the queries for Azure AD is done through the local policy, local registry of the devices, whereas Active Directory is done. It queries the directory instead. Correct?
Yes,
Okay.
correct. Let me talk about that for a little bit.
Hmm.
Um, with with an Active Directory joined device where you're storing the password in Active Directory, it's sort of an assumption. I know this is maybe weakened a little bit in recent years with the work from home and the COVID thing, but it's pretty much a given that an AD joined device is going to have line of sight to the directory most of the time. And so the way that feature was built is every time it's checking, it just locates a domain controller, does an LDAP query, and then that will tell it based on the state that it gets back if its password is expired. Now, the problem with that is that it's a polling based approach.
Yeah.
And just from a sheer scale thing, the polling interval for the legacy feature was aligned with the GPO refresh cycle. So whatever that was, I think it defaults to 90 minutes, but it can be
I
configured
think
by
it is
IT
90 minutes.
admins.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I've seen some customers turn it down, even more because they want quick policy refreshes and stuff. But if you think about Azure and the scale that Azure AD has to deal with, and we knew that this feature was going to be very popular, the idea that tens of millions of machines will be pulling Azure AD every 30 minutes for state that really never changes except in exceptional circumstances really did not make sense. It
Mhm.
just didn't. So that is correct. What you started out with in your intro on this topic was exactly correct. We do not support. This is a design change from Legacy Labs for the new Windows Labs and Azure AD scenario. The expiry timestamp is stored in AD, but that's only for how do I put it? Advertisement purposes, so that admins can query it. The device does not wake up and pull Azure AD on any kind of a regular interval to see if the password is expired. Instead, the device just simply locally remembers when the password expiry is expected, and it'll check that local state and roll it as expected. Now, of course, you could also initiate an immediate reset via the Intune mechanism that we talked about earlier.
Mhm.
Or if you're already on the device, we also have a PowerShell commandlet dedicated for that purpose. So that'll make sense. I hope so.
Wow, this is awesome. Excellent. You hit it on the nail.
Thank you.
So no, I just want to make sure that people understand the differences, and this is what goes on here, and this is what goes on here, and this is why we want you to go to this side of the spectrum of this Windows Labs. Okay, so another thing that I want to mention is, people say, yeah, but I'm afraid of turning Windows Labs on or whatever, or use it because then everybody will have access or know how to get to the local passwords. That is not true. Active Directory based, it's actually controlled by ACLs, right? That's how you set your permissions in your Active Directory to who gets full blown access to be able to encrypt those local passwords and so on and so forth. And then in Azure AD is based on RBAC, right? Role based access control.
Yep. So the first thing I would say is any customer who's contemplating a deployment should definitely read the docs and understand the default, secure by default posture of this feature. So let's talk about the on-premise scenario for a little bit. You mentioned the ACLs. Basically, you would secure Windows Labs passwords in AD exactly, or at least very similar to how they were secured with the legacy feature. But you really want to compose the ACL-based protections with the new password encryption feature. And so this is something that people get tripped up a little bit. So let me just quickly explain that. With the on-premise AD stored passwords, you're now able to utilize and benefit from a two-tiered password security model. And to get in access to the clear text password when it's encrypted, you have to get past both levels. So the first layer is the AD ACLs, same as they've always been for years. You have to have permission in Active Directory to issue an LDAP query to bring those attributes back to your client device. So that's the first layer, and it's just as good as it's always been with Active Directory. The second layer then is, are you authorized to decrypt the password once you've brought it back in its encrypted blob from the directory? And so it's the intersection of these two authorization models that make the on-premise scenario so much more secure.
Yes.
And by default, all Windows Labs devices, unless you configure them otherwise, will only encrypt passwords such that the current domain admins group can decrypt them. So if you don't think you're ever going to be using these, you just want to try it out, definitely then just start with that default. I mean, only your domain admins can get access. So I'd say you're pretty safe there. We really put a lot of thought. I mean, this is serious stuff. You cannot afford a security breach in a feature like this. Knock on wood, we haven't had one, but we put in a lot of work to make sure it was secure by default. Now, switching over to the Azure side, you mentioned earlier that yes, you would secure this RBAC. Yes, exactly. But I do want to call out that the default, if you don't do any RBAC configuration whatsoever, the only built-in roles that are able to retrieve the passwords are, if I recall correctly, global administrators, Intune, and device administrators. So those should already be extremely privileged roles in any company's, IT design. So, but you always good to double check.
All right. So Jay, are there any situations or have you heard from our customers about, break the glass situation? I know when I was a sysadmin and, we had like, a super duper, accounts, like, like the one that gives you powers to everything. And we had that, stored somewhere in case we need to break the glass if all of our other admin accounts are locked out and stuff. Is there a situation like that you've heard about or you've come across that you can myth bust that?
I don't think I can myth bust the concept because I think part of good IT practice is to maintain an account, a very privileged account, usually like in the on-prem world, a domain admin account that you don't use, that you've got locked away. It's in your super secret vault stored on 7 continents for redundancy. So that's a reasonable practice. Now, Windows Labs doesn't manage directory accounts in AD or Azure AD. We only manage the local accounts.
Okay.
Now, you could regard those as a form of break glass because it's your last ditch effort maybe to get into the device. But
what about situations where if someone says, you know what, I'm going to be smart, I'm going to work around this whole lab scenario because I know technology and I know what to do, like tampering, password tampering. Do we have some features built in to protect from that?
We do. So the Legacy Labs feature was built, as we've discussed, as an add-on package to Windows. So you would install the MSI and it would, register itself as a group policy client-side extension, and then that would run every time, and that's how it did its work. So there's nothing wrong with that. But as an add-on, it really couldn't take advantage of any kind of deeper operating system integration. So with the new Windows Labs, one of the things I was really concerned about was making sure that when an admin retrieved that password from the directory, that it was going to work. And so I think that reliability and that trust is really important in a feature like this. And so one of the things that I designed into this product as we were building it was that when an account is being managed by Windows Labs, we don't allow anyone else on the machine to actually modify that password. We want the locally stored version of the password to always be in sync with whatever the password that's stored in the directory is. Now, so I call this, I think I called this in the docs, account tampering protection.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really, it is tampering has a negative connotation,
Right.
but it's really, it could be accidental tampering. It doesn't have to be malicious
Mm-hmm.
tampering. And so what I was trying to ensure is that, like, no matter what, maybe you've got a rogue, how do I put it? Not rogue. Maybe you've got a zealous
A
third-party security app.
disgruntled.
Whether it's a human being who just doesn't know what they're doing, or a zealous third-party security hardening type solution. I wanted to ensure as much as we could that the lapse managed account password is there, it's valid, and it'll match what's stored in the directory, so that when you need it, it's there and it works. So,
Yeah. This is
yes,
very
I'm
reassuring. I mean, it really is, and I think you've put in a lot of these protections in there, because it does happen. I mean, you have people that will try sometimes, and they're like, you know what, I'm just going to go reset locally, the passes, but it'll reset to or it'll protect you from doing that. Uh,
correct.
so
Now,
that's good.
it's not a protection. It's not a bulletproof security guarantee against a malicious local administrator, because
Right.
once somebody's got local admin privileges, it's all over. They can do whatever they want. But again, for the accidental cases or the security hardening cases, yeah, should
Yeah.
work really well.
All right, and one more. So this comes in handy too, because I was in higher ed, and I've worked at various departments and stuff like that, where they don't use their machines for long periods of time. Sometimes they're stored away, right? Whether it's a lab scenario, whether it's like a training center, they pull things out, 3 months later or 6 months later, and things like that. Are there any concerns with Windows Labs for those that haven't connected in a long time?
Nothing lapse specific. The standard caveats are going to apply. So, how do I put it?
You're going to get your licensing, those kind of things. Yeah.
Exactly. So you have to worry about licensing. If you stick an Active Directory join machine in a closet and it for 6 months, and it turns out that your IT admin deletes inactive computer accounts after 3 months, well, that machine's going to be lose its trust relationship.
Exactly.
That's not unique to Windows Labs, of course. But what you could do if you had to is, in that situation, you could, if you've got AD recycle bin turned on in your directory, you could go find the tombstone object for that computer account. You could restore it, and then you can query the lapse password off of what's left of the computer object, and then use that as a, oh, thank goodness, way to get back into the device if that proves necessary. So a lot of customers have asked me this: what happens if the password is changed locally and then you can't talk to the directory, whether that's on-premise AD or Azure AD?
Hmm.
And the whole design of Lapse, this is also true in Legacy Lapse, really steps around that in an elegant way. So the way this works is that when it's time to rotate and store a new password, the client-side component, Windows Lapse, will create the new password. It'll validate that it meets the local device's password policies. Then it will reach out to the directory, store the password in the directory, and then and only then, once it gets back a successful response, will it say, okay, I have the new password in the directory. Now it's time for me to store it locally. And
Hmm.
that's exactly what happens. So, from a technical perspective, what's the riskiest aspects of this entire operation? It's not creating the password. It's not validating it locally. It's finding out whether we can talk to the directory. Can we authenticate to the directory? Did the directory accept our update? And did we get it back a positive response? So if all of that directory related stuff fails, then the device will just shrug its shoulders and say, okay, I guess this interval wasn't my time. I'll just wait 30 minutes or whatever it is
And try
and try
again.
to, yeah. Now, technically, yes, there's a chance that the storing of the local password after it's been accepted by the directory could fail. The odds of this are exceedingly minute, and I've never heard of it happening even once in real life. So it's just
Trust
not
me.
something I worry about. It's just not
Right.
something I worry about.
No. All right. So, Jay, I think what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some resources. So, for example, people can provide feedback, right, to you on Windows Labs, and hey, these are our scenarios. These are what we're looking for. We would like this feature and stuff like that. And you also have you did a tech community AMA that you talked about a lot of the stuff. We'll share that as well. You got your blogs. We got our Learn docs, which are very, very detailed in terms of how things work behind the scenes and how to set up and all that fun stuff. And I believe you have a demo video as well.
Correct. So last November, as part of the Windows Technical Takeoff event, I did an overview video that was about half an hour long, and then I also did 3 or 4 demo videos on all of the different scenarios, Azure AD, domain join AD client. I did one on something we haven't talked about, backing up the domain controller directory services repair mode password. So there's a demo for that. On the feedback topic, I definitely want to call that out again. So I've made no secret of my personal email, jsimmons@microsoft.com. I've published that publicly in several places by now, and I will respond as quickly as possible. So when people send me feedback and questions, if you go to the blog entry, which should have a link to that as well, and you link to my tech community profile, you can drop me a private message there. And then the feedback link that Harjeet mentioned, we've got a bunch of ideas up there, both some that I've put up there, but others posted by customers. And basically, you'll see it when you go to that link. They're color categorized as to their status, whether we're working on them or whether they've been already fixed. So we aren't quite done with Windows Labs. You will be seeing new features and future versions of Windows. So we're definitely excited to get any kind of feedback we can from our customers.
Amazing. You have opened the channels of communication, and which is in so many ways. It's amazing. I hope
Oh,
people take
learned a
advantage of
lot.
it. Yeah, and Microsoft is built on feedback, right? I mean, we need to listen. We need to take your feedbacks so that we can improve and provide the solutions our customers need. So, Jay, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful, wonderful, share from you and a great discussion.
Thank you, Harjeet. This has been really great, and I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you.
Thank you for watching Tackling Tech. I hope you enjoyed this episode and learned something new. Please like, subscribe to this channel, and stay up to date with the latest episodes. And if you have any feedback or suggestions for future episodes, please let us know in the comments below. You can also follow me on Twitter for more updates and awesomeness at Tackling Tech. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.